Battlefield 6 is a completely dead game, and honestly, I think SBMM is to blame. Well, now that we got that out of the way and you're here, let's actually talk about SBMM in Call of Duty, or in Battlefield, I should say. I'm so used to saying Call of Duty, I said Battlefield. Anyway, Battlefield 6 is one of those games that has SBMM in it. It was baked in from the beginning, and it's something that surprisingly, after the weekend of the beta, and in previous builds that I've played, most of the time it's not noticed at all. And I think it's one of those things that's done so well, and Battlefield is renowned for this, to be honest. Like, they are known for their how their matchmaking works. Um, and it works in such a way that it's kind of invisible, and it just generally delivers a fairly consistent feel game over game. Unlike where Call of Duty is, where Call of Duty's SBMM system is very reactive and very strong in how it is applied to gaming, right? Everybody who plays Warzone knows the adage, don't win your first game on, or you're going to have a miserable rest of the night or rest of the day, depending on when you log on. And I think most people, are aware of that, right? And so when we talk about Battlefield, when we talk about what's going on with Battlefield and Battlefield's uh, SBMM systems, it's one of those one of those up in the air things, right? Everybody hears the term SBMM, they hear skill based matching, they hear matchmaking, they hear skill being used in matchmaking, and the immediate call from honestly from Battlefield fans is, why not just give us a server browser and leave us alone? The reality is that that's not the answer, really. The answer is, what are they doing with SBMM that works so well? So I want to look at this series of statements from this is from David Sherland. Let me pull up the right one here. Nope, I lied. There we go. In which he talks about the setup and specifically what matchmaking is going on and what matchmaking is doing. And they've talked about this before, and I think most people got their hands on it, and it was really interesting to feel compared to Call of Duty, right? Warzone specifically, but multiplayer as well. Um, David says, clarification, open beta used all matchmaking priorities we expect for launch, and they are the same as they have been in previous titles. We prioritize ping and time to game ahead of most things. Skill is a factor, but far down the list, and all our large modes need a spread of skill to work well. I think this is really important. The sandbox needs many different types of skill to function well, and that's also why the matchmaker team balances to make the teams make the teams even as part of that process. So when you hear that, I think it's one of those things where most people who are used to Call of Duty, specifically Call of Duty, but other games as well, they hear skill being used in matchmaking, and we assume that we're being manipulated. We assume that there's a system in place to kind of determine the type of game you're going to have. In Call of Duty, it's not uncommon, if you do well for a while, that you're going to start being handed either lobbies in which everybody is extremely talented, right? And you are faced with very high levels of competition all the time, right? The worst player on the team is very talented compared to the top player, right? Or you have scenarios where you are put on a team where your enemies are somewhat below your skill level, but they're still, fairly high up there. But your teammates are all bad players. And so the game balances that lobby by making sure that, the average skill of both sides is kind of the same. But the reality is that you are on an island of your own trying to win the game against much, much more talented opponents than your teammates are. And that's an unfun experience for a lot of folks as well. And those matches tend not to have a team that sticks around, right? You tend to end up with only 2 or 3 people left on the enemy team in a 6v6 mode. So what does Battlefield do? Well, Battlefield, again, as David mentioned, Battlefield focuses on, kind of the randomized experience, but what they But what they're doing with the SBMM, where the skill typically comes in Battlefield, is actually with how they balance the teams, right? So they take the two top. So in previous titles, what they've done, and you can, and COD used to do this as well. But what you would see is you would see the match would end and the scoreboard, right? And you might have two or three guys that are like top in the game on one team. The next game, they're going to split those guys up, right? And you're going to have, one on one side, two on the other, and there might be a third guy that pops in that's been having a good game, and they'll put them on the other team. So you have a balance, right? And they really do try to balance that all the way down. And for for this game, you know, it actually works to have a wide spread of skill on the field at the same time, right? Um, and I think it's something that it's I think there's a struggle to have that in Call of Duty, and Call of Duty leans towards more of the individual play, right? Call of Duty likes it when one person can really carry the team, when one person is significantly better than everyone else, and they can run a score streak, they get the chopper gun, and they can drop a nuke in a lobby, they can do all of these things. Um, because there's such a skill differential and it's a small map, right? It's a small field. And so I think with Call of Duty, even though their systems that they're built on encourage that, they try not to allow it to happen, which is a little counterintuitive. Because why design all of these individualistic systems if you don't want individuals to succeed? Okay, it's just how Call of Duty has been for the last, I don't know, 5-8 years, versus Battlefield, which is always been kind of like this random chaos generator, right? And over the weekend, I experienced this whole thing on both sides, right? Like I've been on teams that we just were dominating, we're doing really well. People were holding positions well, and it was a fun game to be a part of and win. And I had others where it wasn't, where things would be you'd struggle, right? I had one game where everybody seemed to have a sniper and there was nowhere to go to snipe because there were like 37 glints looking at you. Um, that being said, in that game, it's not like Call of Duty, where if one team is dominant on the map, they own the whole map, right? They control the whole map. You are limited, often spawn trapped, and there's not a lot you can do, right? If you are out being outplayed and you're outclassed on a small map, in a small Call of Duty map, it's just kind of that's just how the game's going to go. And and that is, I think, an experience that Call of Duty is really trying hard to get rid of, which you just can't do artificially. You just can't. It's not working, and we've all kind of seen that. Battlefield, on the other hand, because it's so many players and the maps are so much bigger, and I'm talking about like the main conquest style mode. Um, it really produces an interesting dynamic in that you can have a struggle session in one part of the map. You can try to take one POI and it just is not going to go. The players that own it are playing well. They've got good position, and they're just better than you. You can go somewhere else on that map and you can find success, right? You are not going to run into all top players because of the way the matchmaking works. Is there will be good players, a handful of good players, and then just a graduated skill down to a larger pool of not good players. And that's just how randomness works, right? When you have a big pool of players and you have a random application of where those of players, you get a bell curve of skill. And so what you get from that, what's really helpful in Battlefield, with their skill based, how they use skill in their matchmaking, um, is you can just go to another part of the map and it's a completely different fight, right? I mentioned I was, dealing with, trying to snipe. I wasn't having success. I switched to the assault class. I went with the M4. I inserted on a different objective, and that objective was hotly contested, and it was contested by a variety of players. I got a bunch of kills. I died a couple of times. I kept going back, um, and it was generally just it was a completely different experience. It was like playing a different lobby than on the first objective where I tried to play in. And I think it's just it's going to become a matter um of how you want to play. I think that's kind of how Battlefield presents itself, and that's how they've situated themselves. And that's one of the big reasons why I think skill-based matchmaking works so well. You don't have these hard requirements to build a lobby, right? They're not trying to build a lobby that of matched skill or matched progress. I don't know how else to say it besides matched skill. Like that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make every lobby feel like a 1 KD lobby where it's like everybody's equal. And it doesn't work as well, and it definitely doesn't work as well in Warzone either. um Warzone by default, just it has too many players, right? You can't build a Warzone lobby with strict matchmaking, you know, and have a chance for everyone to play. And we know this because we look at how ranked works, right? Ranked distribution right now has been atrocious in terms of like how far they let it slide. I mean, I've been in diamond lobbies with diamond players and run into top 250 and Crimson and Eries regularly. Like it's not just, oh, there's one in a lobby we ran into one time. It's like, oh, you bounce from one firefight to another, and it's like, oh, I died to a Crim over here. I died to an Eerie in the Gulag, and then I died to another Crim in a different part of the map when I came back, when I got bought back. Like that's a ranked experience when you're supposed to be like fighting people that are at your skill level. And that's one of the reasons I think Call of Duty struggles with their matchmaking so much is they don't have the player skill spread figured out, right? There isn't a good spread to them. I've talked about this in other videos where, in order to have the random matchmaking work is you have to somehow account for a spread of skill, right? You have to be able to do that. And if you're trying to isolate part of the skill, it throws everything off. You just can't take a portion of the player base and protect it from general matchmaking and have the random systems work out. But that being said, I think it's, the counterpoint that comes up whenever people talk about Battlefield and SBMM, what comes up is a server browser, right? So the old Battlefields, like you would log in and you would go to play, and it would basically have a list of all the different browsers and all the different games that are running that you can hop into. And what was beneficial about that is you'd have different experience, kind of like how in modern gaming you have playlists, right? The company will go and they'll put together playlists, right, of different map rotations, different rule sets, and you can pick the map. You can pick the experience you want to play, and then you just hop in and you start playing. With Battlefield server browser, the way it kind of worked was that experience would be there set by the company, and then individuals could create their own servers and have their own experiences, and you can just kind of float between browsers. And it's been a much demanded feature, and they're actually kind of going at it again. And this, this is from David, and what he talked about was, so he talks about going to the open beta, and the servers come up again. And so he says, it's what we've been harping about, the portal. And so he's talking about the portal, which is a section of the game we haven't gotten to yet. We haven't seen this yet. The portal browser is basically enabling map playlists and the matchmaking systems. And so so it's, again, there's constant pushbacks, and he comes out and he says there is a server browser. It contains servers. Some are custom experience, some are verified, which means the main mode, and then the combination persistent servers. And he kind of goes into it, right? And then we get back into the matchmaking, some more topic of the matchmaking. But the thing with server browsers, and this is one of those things that I think is a different world that we're in now versus before, right? Before, there wasn't so much of a unified experience, right, in gaming. But I think we've had so many games in which, people want the quick play feeling. They want to just push a button and start playing. They don't want to hunt down a server. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to spend time building a community. They just want to play the game. And I think that's a much more common experience now, especially in games like Battlefield, that we haven't had in the past. In the past, we've had people that are much more willing, when people played games, they were much more dedicated to the game, right? The gaming as a whole was smaller, and it was a much more, it wasn't as mainstream as it's become in the last 5, 8, 10 years, right? Gaming has really gone leaps and bounds kind of out of the nerd closet and into, now you have NFL draft players, officially playing new games and talking about their gaming habits and what they like to play on road trips and things like that. Professional athletes saying this stuff, which 10, 15 years ago they never talked about it. Like if they played games, you never knew it, right? The most you would hear is like, oh, who's on the cover of Madden this year, right? Like that would be the extent in which pro athletes and celebrities really kind of talked about gaming habits, and it was much more of a closed. It's not a closed community, but it was a much more closed community than it is now. Now it's almost socially acceptable, right? And I think a lot of that came from the pandemic. A lot of people picked up gaming or re-picked up gaming, or admitted that they played gaming, especially older professionals. And it became more mainstream, right? That's just the way to think about it. It's more mainstream than it was before. And I think a server browser for a player who is either not familiar with Battlefield or has come into gaming in the last 5 years, where server browsers are not common. There are very few games doing a server browser now, and I think introducing that as a first step, as like, hey, go pick a server to play on, is something that isn't going to be as well received from a usability standpoint as saying, pick the mode you want to play and we'll throw you in there. And I think what Battlefield, what DICE have been saying, and David definitely was saying this in his tweet, is we're going to have both. We're going to have the quick play. I just want to hop on and play. I don't have a clan. I don't have a group. I don't have a bunch of friends that play the game. I'm not trying to get 30 people to play together. I just want to go in and I want to play and I want to get into a game as quickly as possible so that I can have fun. And I think the quick play settings, like the traditional matchmaking that we've become accustomed to, that we experienced over the weekend, I think is a great option. I think it's good to have. I think it's a good step one. And then having a very available, very visible portal, they're calling it a portal, but a server browser that you can refine it and you can kind of, you can do all of the things that people did with server browsers in the past without alienating people who are just picking it up or don't want to mess with servers. Maybe they don't want to, they're not there to make friends. They're just there to have fun. Maybe they just want to play on their own. They just want to, turn off the brain and plug in, right? Like this is the sort of experience, and this is going to be millions of players. This is not the minority. This is going to be the majority of players that will have this attitude going into it, and not even depending on how much of Battlefield fans they are, right? It's literally, where are you in life? What are you doing? And how do I make the game accessible to you, while also having a wider selection of options for the more advanced and the more diehard fans. And so I think what they're doing is actually great. I think they're making the right moves. I think, the without having the concept in front of people, I think it's, the idea that we're SBMMing and we're matchmaking and we're doing all of these things that Battlefield's not known for, on paper really upsets people and sounds like they've lost the plot, when in reality it's like they've heard you, right? And it's like, it's why we have remasters, right? It's why we don't have to go out and buy a Super Nintendo to play Super Nintendo games. They create ROMs. So it's like why our old childhood games get remastered, and we like that. We prefer it with the updated graphics and some fixing some of the control issues that may have existed with older controllers. We like these things, right? We like the old feeling, right? The old experience with the new shininess. And I think that's what Battlefield is doing a great job with. So very impressive. Battlefield might be dead for now, but it's definitely not going to be dead completely, because next week we have another beta launch, and then we're on the road to October, where we get Black Ops 7, Battlefield 6, and like 3 other titles dropping. So I'm excited for the end of this year. I think fall is going to be busy. Going to have a lot of choices. Going to have choices for like the first time in years, which is awesome. And I think it's going to be good for gaming in general. So if you have more thoughts to throw in, if you disagree, if you think I'm wrong, let me know. If you agree, also let me know. Hit the subscribe button, ring the bell, do all the YouTube stuff, and I'll catch you on the next one.